going to move over into simply moving files. So in this case, we'll just jump right in, and it'll be the same structure as the copy command. You give it the command we're going to use is mv, so that's to move a file, and we're going to give a file name. So we're going to, in this case, you know what? Let's list the directories and everything here. So we're going to move one of our backup files here. So I'm going to do move sshd, hit tab. I want to specify a backup file, and I want to use my dated backup file just because that's what I prefer. And I'm going to move it into my temp directory. So I'm going to do my temp, hit tab, and then I'm going to use the / to specify I want it to go into that directory. So this is a simple way to do it. I've got everything correct, move, the file that I want, and then the directory. And I'm going to hit enter. And now when I do a listing, I no longer have the dated backup directory, but if I do a listing of my temp directory and hit enter, I now see sshd underscore config dash copy.bak underscore the date. So perfect. I moved that file from one location to another on the system. And what this does is, it's important to know, you're not actually moving the data on the disk itself or on the drive itself. The way file systems work is there's a pointer that references the actual data, and when you move it, you're actually just moving or updating the pointer to the data. So imagine the data sitting in section A on a drive, and you move it to another location. It's still in section A, like there's no reason for it to move, but there's a table that references that section A is where that file's contents are held, and that gets updated to the new path, so that way it can find the file. So as long as it's on the same partition, on the same drive, that's all it's doing. And what we'll go over later is I'll show you when we move it to another partition what happens, but it's good to know that you're not actually moving the data, it's just changing the pointer to the file. So what we can use move for is we moved it from one location to another, but we also use it to rename files. So I'm going to do a listing here, and let's cat file 1. All right, so there's Latin in here. So what I'm going to do is, file 1's not very specific, maybe I just want to rename it. So the way you rename files in Linux is with the move command. So there's no rename command here, it's just simply use the move command, and we're going to say move file 1, and I'm going to call this Latin file 1. And when I hit enter and I do a listing, we can tell that file 1 was updated to Latin file 1. So you can rename it whatever you want to. Now there are special characters you should avoid, on the file system just because they have special meanings. But typically dashes and underscores perfectly fine and acceptable. Avoid using slashes, $signs, things like that. We'll get into those details eventually. But for now, as you can tell, I'm just using alphanumeric characters, so lowercase a through z, capital A through z, numbers, and dashes and underscores. Those are very safe and fine to use on the Linux system. So we just went ahead and renamed the file using move. Another thing we can use move for is it also renames directories. So copy can copy files and it can copy directories, but you need a flag. With move, that's it's a little different. You just use move to rename a file, and you just use move to rename a directory. Like I said, you're not actually changing the location or anything. It doesn't really matter about the difference between a file and a directory when you're renaming. So we will do, let's go ahead and rename my temp directory 2, right? Maybe I meant to say, let's make that my temp directory backup, right? So I'm going to say move my temp directory 2, and I'm going to specify my temp directory, and I'll just do -BAK because it's a directory. Typically I like to have files with a dot, just because a lot of people recognize that as a file with an extension, and then directories don't typically, or don't have extensions actually. So I'm going to just rename my temp directory 2 to my temp directory -BAK. So hit enter, And when I list it, we can now see that my directory was renamed. We didn't get a warning like we did with the copy command, which is nice. But that's another way to use the move command to rename a directory as well as files. All right, and so one last thing before we're done with these topics is I went ahead and just generated a large file, a 1 gigabyte file. We'll go over this command and its use in another video, but in this case, just you can see that the output says I have basically a 1 gigabyte file, and I called it very large file. So I'm going to do a listing here. And what I wanted to show you is I'm going to move this to another directory, and I want you to see the time frame. So this is referring back to the data not actually moving if it's on the same volume. So I'm going to just move this file, move very large file, and I'm going to move it to my directory. And notice the prompt comes back instantly. It's very quick, and it took a few seconds at least for that 1 gigabyte file to be created. And if it's moving the actual data, I would expect to wait a few seconds for that to occur. But in this case, the prompt comes back immediately. If I list my directory and then very large file, I can see that it's there, and actually we'll use ls-lh just to see the size. So we have a 1 gigabyte file of just basically nothing, but it's taking up 1 gigabyte on the system. And it took no time at all, though, to move it from one directory to another directory on the same volume or the same partition on my system. So I'm going to now move this to another partition, and we'll go over this command later, but this is df. Well, we'll show you the disk file systems that are available, and currently I'm working under this slash directory, and notice I've got I'm using 1.6 gigabytes. One of those is that file I created, but I want to move it to somewhere completely different, and I'm going to use this mount D partition over here. So notice I'm going to move, I have to specify my directory and then very large file. And so now I'm going to move this file to /mnt. I have to fully qualify it, meaning I start with the /. So I'm going to do D and then slash, and then that's all I have to do. It's going to go into my directory and take very large file, and it's going to move it to /mnt/D and put the file there. So when I hit enter, watch. So notice the prompt is hanging. It hung for a couple seconds, and that's because it actually had to take the data, write it to the new volume, and then it removes the volume from my current partition. So if I do a listing of my directory, there's no very large file. But if I do a listing of mount D, I now see a very large file there. Awesome. That's exactly what I wanted to do. And so it's good to know about how this works, because sometimes when you're moving files, depending on what volume or what drive you're using, it can take longer for things to back up than based on where you're moving the file. I've moved hundreds of gigabytes before, and that can take a long time depending on which file or partition you're moving from. And so if it's on the same volume or on the same partition, it will just change the pointer and it's updated. If you're moving it to another partition, just be aware that it might take a little bit of time for that to occur. And so what I'm going to do now is, just because I don't want to forget about this file here, I've been working in my home directory, I'm going to move this file back. So I'm going to do /mnt D, very large file, and I'm going to just, I'm in my home directory, so I can use dot for here. I can use the tilde. You can check out my other videos about these details using, about your home directory and things like that. But I'm going to just specify dot because I want to put it right back here. Hit enter. We see it takes another few seconds again. But now when I list my home directory, very large file is back. That's what I wanted to do, so I don't forget about it. But now we know how to move files, and we know a little bit more about what happens moving between partitions or different volumes on the system. And before I complete this video, I do want to show you one other thing with move. So we moved files, we moved large ones. I showed you how to rename files and directories with it, but I didn't go over how to move a directory itself. And that is possible. We can do that. So what I'm going to do is, let's say I've got my temp directory and the backup one. Let's say I want to move that into my directory, right? So let's go ahead and simply do that. I'm going to just do move. Let's move my temp directory -bak, and I want to move the entire thing into my directory, right? So maybe I just don't want it out of here. I try to keep my file systems clean and organized. Helps me work efficiently. So I'm gonna just say, you know what? I don't want you here. I want you over here in my directory. So when I hit enter, I'll do a listing. I no longer have my temp directory -bak, but I'm going to cd into my directory this time, do a listing, and now I can see my temp directory -bak. So when you have a directory, you can move it like a file. Once again, copy, you have to use the -r flag. With move, you do not. You can just say, okay, whatever is my starting point, this directory, anything from here down is going to be moved, and it'll just bring everything with it. That's the magic of the move command, and I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out as well, that you can move files and you can also move directories in Linux.